So I wanted to do a video on hydrogen bonding, and this is going to be the most non-technical description of hydrogen bonding in the DNA and in general, but that you could possibly imagine. But I think everybody who's seen anything that I've done, all of the 2 people who follow me, if that, I think I have no followers that are consistent. But anyway, the future follower of someday, or me, my own record, or my children, whatever, would know that at this point I'm kind of learning as I go. But I'm sitting here and I'm kind of in awe of what I've done for myself, as far as building a biohacker's paradise, and I really have. So looking around my room, I have tools to basically take control of most aspects of my biology directly, to override the natural mechanisms that are at play in the environment, and largely I achieve that by artificially creating different environments. So I really just wanted to take a minute and kind of appreciate how significant ions and hydrogen therapy is, and how as a therapeutic combination it is limitless in its medical application. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about fungal infections because, quite frankly, I don't know a lot about them, other than that they, exist as part of our natural microbiome. I know that negative ions are antifungal. At some point, I'll get to researching that. I just haven't. But what I understand thus far is essentially the combination therapeutically is potentially limitless in its potential to intervene, right? Because that's what doctors, I think, oftentimes, not that I'm a doctor, any sort of medical professional, I'm not at all. I'm a amateur biohacker who attempts to manipulate his own biology for athletic performance and long-term health goals. That's it. That's what I am, what I do in my free time, largely. So, as a amateur biohacker, what I look at is the threats, right? What's most likely to kill me, what's holding me back. And for my entire amateur hobby period, I don't want to call it a career because I have a career, but for the entire time that I've kind of been into biohacking, into going to the gym, into athletics and all that stuff, it's always been chemical compounds, diet. I got into diet timing, I got into intermittent fasting, I got into everything. And I've always been EMF sensitive, EMF aware. I've studied that significantly more than what a normal person, I shamelessly have videos of myself, and I have aluminum foil on my walls. That's not aluminum foil behind me, but actually, yeah, no, there is some aluminum foil behind me. It is what it is. I consider it a semi-legitimate threat that I semi-mitigate against, and sometimes I repurpose my tinfoil and use it for other stuff, but most of the time Nothing nefarious. Well, somewhat nefarious. I got a new bong stem and it doesn't fit, but I don't make crack pipes. You know, it's just weed. But you know, whatever. It's not like nothing can touch me, but I do consider it a threat, right? And all that stuff is an anthill next to, and I'm gonna not include some other therapeutics that I find really significant, but none of that stuff compares. It's like an anthill next to the combination of hydrogen and negative ions and their potential to overall improve your health, improve your likelihood of surviving by the combination of beating down viral threats, right? That we're all exposed to, right? By keeping those suppressed, and then conversely and intermittently flushing out your mitochondria and re-energizing your metabolism, right? These are the two underlying. People will talk about inflammatory conditions, okay? And that's one of the main underlying causes of disease. But inflammatory conditions are caused by friction, radiation, or something eating you, like a bacteria or a virus, right? So the inflammation, to say inflammation is the underlying cause of all disease, I think grossly oversimplifies the situation. So the underlying cause of most disease is a metabolic disorder, where your body is not generating enough energy to trigger apoptosis and self-destruct cancer cells. That's one of diabetes, you know, and a lot of others are also consequences of metabolic disorders, but that's near the top of the list as far as an underlying cause of all human disease. And if you can hydrate the mitochondria while adding a second fuel source, potentially, to any metal compounds, then you are going to really clean out the engine of your existing metabolic engine. You're going to flush out the gunk of your existing metabolic engine, while also putting like a booster back on it. It's really that significant. And I would add that DNA damage is often hydrogen depletion, right? So if you have damaged DNA, it's going to become obvious the more you look at this, that your body uses these hydrogen molecules to build your DNA, to hold your DNA together, that with the absence of hydrogen, your DNA does not exist. And DNA damage is often a missing hydrogen molecule. That's what DNA damage is. So if you are supplementing yourself with additional hydrogen, you're going to be intrinsically preventing DNA damage. That's just what the DNA molecule is missing. Okay, well, your body's saturated with hydrogen, so there's another one to fill its place. And it's not going to go missing when your body's saturated with hydrogen, because any enzyme or catalyst that wants to steal that hydrogen molecule is going to have other places to steal it from. So it's going to prevent DNA damage by that mechanism, but potentially more significant to your health is the flushing out of your mitochondria by reacting with hydroxy radicals there. So that it's so significant, it cannot be understated. And then to look at the negative ion generator as the opposing force to that, that will steal hydrogen from your DNA or other DNA, is like the self-regulating feature. Okay, so you're not gonna hyper adapt to a hydrogen-rich environment because you have the counterpart stressor to prevent that slow adaptation that will always happen over time. So if you're constantly taking sugar in, your body's gonna, adapt to that. If you are constantly, breathing hydrogen, your body will adapt to that. And, it's just what happens. So if you want to maintain the therapeutic benefit, you don't want to adapt to it, because when you adapt to it, you lose the therapeutic benefit and it becomes an essential just to function. Okay, that's not addiction, that's adaptation, but they can often manifest as the same thing. So you don't want to adapt to it because you want to maintain that therapeutic benefit. You want to be able to survive a stressed environment, and that's good. The thing that's really, really good about it is the environment isn't so stressed that it's even really a concern at all. Like, you would really have to hyper-expose yourself to even get a headache. Like, an absurd amount. You'd have to hold it right next to your head for like 10 hours. And you'd probably get a pretty bad headache, or like, you know what I mean? Something like that. But how well it's tolerated is significant because you can sit in the cloud. Okay? So negative ions are basically free electrons, that slow moving free electrons that are being pumped into the air. Now, if there's nothing for them to react to, they won't go anywhere. They need a carrier, right? Air by itself is an insulator. So you would need a voltage X to jump insulator Y. I don't know the math off the top of my head, but to jump, 1 inch of air with electricity, you need a good, I want at least probably 10,000 volts, but it might be 20,000 to jump in a full inch. It might be more, it might be 30,000, but it's in that. It's 10,000 is probably going to jump a half an inch max, and whatever. I'm not going to think about that too much. You get my point. So the electricity isn't going into you. The electricity is binding molecules that are already in your air. And those molecules have the potential to hold a charge, so they're ionic, right? If they're a molecule and they have the potential to hold a charge, they're an ionic molecule. So they take up this extra electron, and now they're different than they were before. So if the air was stable before, which it probably was because it's not, being affected by any electrical discharges, so why would it be unstable? If the air was stable before, it's no longer stable. And now that ionized particle, that particle that has an extra ion, is looking to balance itself out. It's kind of spinning with a wobble, right? And when it's spinning with a wobble, it bumps into something else, and they bond together. Now the molecule is a little bit heavier, okay? And it falls out of the air eventually. It's more easy to be filtered, etc., etc. That's like the sales pitch that these things have had forever. And it's pretty true, right? The next level is when you're lucky enough to ionize a water molecule, right? You can create hydroxide, and that hydroxide can be absorbed into your body, right? So it's like a range thing. So I'm going to show this one. That's the whatever, I forgot the name of it, but it's cool. It's got a little magnetic filter on it, and that magnetic filter you can move from the back to the front depending on whatever you want. And the idea of it on the back is obviously going to be protecting the machine, and the idea of it being on the front is to kind of magnetize the air, maybe structure the air a little bit, structure water molecules in the air. But what I'm using it for is basically I damped it. I got it wet. So I wanted it, and it's been running for 20 minutes, and it's pretty much completely dry. There's a few, it's like a metal mesh netting. So there's a few little of the mesh squares I can see that still have water molecules or water droplets in them. But for the most part, you know, it's just a few droplets of water, but I'm only a few feet away from it. So the way I'm looking at it is those particular molecules have a higher likelihood of entering your body and circulating with the water and neutralizing any viruses that they might interact with. And that's huge. But there's also the fact of proximity, right? So when I'm this close to it, I have a negative ion detector, and it's tiny, you know, but I don't know where it is right now. My house is kind of messy, so it's probably down in my basement. But I have a negative ion detector. I could tell you right now, just from my experience with generators of this size, that I am not in like the downstream effects. There are free negative electrons that are not like heavily bound, right? Like in the air that I'm breathing right now. So these molecules, in order for them to really like clump up, they almost have to have lost their ionic charge. You wouldn't be able to detect them, right? So if the air is still ionized, you still have like one molecule that's spinning with the off-kilter free electron bound to it. But you don't have the second molecule yet. It's all probability, you know, and distance and percentages. But at this distance, it's probably the majority of the molecules that I'm breathing are single molecules that have one, you know, free electron bound to them, and not like a true ionic compound. So that's where it gets into like you don't want to breathe in the compounds, but really the single molecule with a single electron bound to it, you kind of do want to breathe if you're trying to purge your body of potential infections. So that's what you get where I'm going with this. If I was like 8 feet away or maybe 10 feet away, I would be more concerned about not concerned, okay, because it diffuses over time and it's kind of self-regulating in that way. It's not, but just like I would be less apt to say that there's any therapeutic benefit Okay, and my thinking with that is, yes, you've eliminated the viruses in the mold from the airstream, but anything that I or the client is now breathing is a significantly larger particle, and that significantly larger particle, if it's still airborne, is going to be more likely to be an irritant than a smaller particle. The counter argument, of course, is, well, the smarter particles will go deeper into your lungs and maybe cause longer term problems because you won't cough them up. And, you know, everything's kind of, you could look at it multiple ways. But if you are trying to get that ionizing effect, in other words, you're trying to sterilize your blood, you're trying to eliminate a viral load from your lymphatic system, whatever the case may be, if the molecule is already an ionic compound, then it's not going to have any effect on viruses inside of you. But if you are relatively close, then those molecules, again, they're not going to be truly unbound to anything, because that electricity just doesn't move through the air like that. But they are going to be in a reactive molecule that is probably no larger than the molecule you are going to be putting in your lungs anyway. So you are gaining a free electron that, if it's not picked up by your lung tissue, which could be therapeutic if you have an infection in your lungs, is enter your bloodstream and go to your heart and potentially neutralize any viruses or anything that would react with an electron. Anything, you know, that that molecule would want to bind with that. And I think that is, to have the combination is like to have the ability to pick any lock in your body. This can't be understated.